Welcome to LOA Today. I'm Walt Thiessen. I've been doing this podcast since September of 2012, and boy, are my lips tired. This is your daily dose of happy. We are so happy you decided to join us today.
And I am not joined today by my co-host, Anne-Marie Young. Anne-Marie's not feeling well today. She's dealing with some kind of an illness that has crept up on her. So hopefully she's going to be better and join us again next week. But I am joined today by a storyteller. And we love stories around here. We all know that. Her name is Wendy Folsom. And well, first of all, Wendy, welcome to the program. How you doing?
I'm doing very well. I'm excited to be here.
Glad to have you. The second thing I got to ask you is, I love that you're into storytelling, but this is not exactly the first thing that people pick when they decide what their career path is going to be. How did you end up as a storyteller of all things?
It's been a winding path. So my first background was in theater and doing musical theater primarily. And then, I had children and it was just hard to commit to such a long performance and rehearsal schedule. And I moved to an area that had a very prominent storytelling festival. And I thought, I wonder what that is. I didn't really know what it was. And I heard that if you audition and get in with even a story, they'll give you a free family pass. And I thought, well, I want a free family
Yeah, there you go.
I'm not sure what storytelling is, but I'll put together my best guess. And so I did. I went and auditioned with an old Southern folktale called Wiley and the Hairy Man. And they thought I was a little too theatrical. So they almost... I think I even went in costume, which really isn't a storyteller kind of typical choice. I was wearing overalls and whatever, but
they just need to grow up. That's all. I mean, welcome to the world of theater where it exists everywhere, right?
Exactly. Yeah. It's just the purest form of theater, in my opinion.
Yeah.
There's usually no lighting, no costumes, and you're just with the story. And I fell in love with it. And they did let me in, by the way. So I got my family there. They squeaked me in. And I just started reading voraciously everything I could get my hands on about storytelling. And luckily, because of the festival, the local library also had the largest storytelling collection west of the Mississippi.
Wow.
So I had videos and even cassette tapes. This is back about 20 years, and just books, tons of books to read. So I got obsessed, and I've been telling stories ever since. And I even eventually went back to East Tennessee State University and got a master's degree in storytelling. It's the only accredited program that I know of in the United States.
Oh my goodness. Wow. That's kind of hard to believe. I mean, I believe you. I'm sure that what you're saying is true. But when you think about the role that stories play in our lives, or narratives, make it a broader term, because literally narratives drive every aspect of our lives.
They do.
Kind of mind-blowing that they don't have courses on that.
Well, I think there's storytelling elements of different programs, and you certainly have many writing programs, of course. And so people are catching on that it's an important part of business, education, and even medicine, storytelling, medical storytelling is just growing in leaps and bounds. So it's growing. But as far as like a traditional university program, all focus mostly on storytelling. It's the only one.
It's mind-blowing. It's absolutely mind-blowing. And by the way, my sister was a theater major, so you guys have that in common. In fact, she just had something really exciting happen. For the first time in her life, she landed the lead in a play, and she's just mind blown. So my brother, myself, my brother's wife, family, we're gonna all fly out there and
fun.
Check her out when she's in her play. She's in North Carolina. And
I love that area. I fell in love with that area when I went back for school. What's the role?
She's playing the role. What's the name of the play? It's a play that's based on the same idea as the old television series. What's the name of the television series? Golden Girls. The Golden Girls.
Oh, fun!
She's playing the B. Arthur character.
Oh, fun! Oh my heavens! What a fun way to spend your time.
Absolutely, yeah. It's gonna be, and my sister's a very good actor. So yeah.
Well, and just to finish off my little wandering journey, my undergrad, I was children's playwriting, and then went into storytelling. And then I also got obsessed and met through a professor through story analysis. So I'm very big into story structure. It's a particular kind of character-based story structure and mapping out stories. And so then I get this job. I'm at BYU Broadcasting and radio. So we're the radio, and it's all been morphed into podcasting.
Oh, okay.
We still have a live radio station that our material goes out on, but we really focus on the podcasting. And the job was to produce the Appleseed, which is a storytelling podcast. So I was re-immersed back into the storytelling world. And then also we do Kaboom, which is original audio dramas. And so we're writing scripts. And not only am I writing scripts, we have a student writing team that we need to coach. So I'm coaching stories, I'm writing scripts, and I'm still rubbing shoulders with the storytelling world. So I don't know how I ended up here. I mean, Well,
you described it very well. I'd love to tell the story of how you got there, right?
But it's a very unusual path, and I actually ended up working in my field. I just felt strongly about every step, and just followed it. And I was as surprised as the next person that I actually ended up having a full-time job doing all these things that I love.
Well, congratulations, first of all. And actually, it fits in beautifully with one of the themes that we talk about a lot here on the program. The idea of the stories that we tell in our own lives, to ourselves, to our families, to our friends, the ones that we repeat over and over and over and over and over and ad nauseum until finally they become the basis of our lives. And then we wonder how our lives ended up that way. It's the stories we told. And we continue to tell them.
Yes. It was made out of stories for sure.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. And the thing that's always the most startling to us is when we realize just how many of those stories are negative. We talk about all these things that we don't like, that we don't want, that we want to block, that we wish they didn't exist, blah, 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 blah. And then we wonder why they continue to exist. Like, well, you're telling the stories, guys.
Yes. Yeah.
One of the big skills is learning how to change that, right? Learning how to change that behavior.
Well, and we have so much power to do that. And that's one of the reasons why I just love the story structure, the character-based story structure that we do, because we literally look at these patterns that happen in every kind of story, whether it's a drama, a tragedy, a satire, or these patterns are just a comedy, and the certain characters serve certain functions in all these things. So they show up on this thing that we map it out on. And you can literally say, what story am I in? By looking at the patterns of who's playing what functions in my life. Yeah. What kind of story am I in? Am I in a tragedy? Or what story do I want to be? I probably want to be in a heroic drama where I can triumph at the end. And it's like, what needs to shift in those patterns? Because the stories that we tell are based off of the patterns of the stories that we live. It's this reciprocal thing, of course. Yeah. And so it's fun in that work to say, I'm in this situation. How do I want the outcome to be? And what function do I need to serve? Where do I need to shift? Yeah. And who else am I missing? You got to get some allies, or you've got to get, a mentor or whatever. And I really have applied that to my life. I look at my whole life so differently after studying story structure. It's just
I love the way that you laid out the elements of the story, in particular, because the first element you laid out was character. Yeah. And to be honest, no matter if we're looking at entertainment, any entertainment, if it doesn't have good characterization, I lose interest really, really fast.
Me too.
Yeah. I mean, seriously, if you don't have good characterization, what's the point?
Exactly.
But it also plays off into our everyday lives. I mean, we get to choose what kind of characterizations are going to exist in our stories.
Yes.
That's one of the best skills we can learn, I think, is learning the characterization skill.
Yeah. And again, the functions that we serve, what functions are we serving in our own story? Like, for example, are we a norm breaker, or do we need to become more of a norm breaker? System that we're up against, and where that central conflict is. And we have a safe character or a mentor who's, helping buffer us a little bit from that system and showing us the ropes. And then the hero is literally defined as who saves the day. Like, there's a lot of heroic looking characters, but are they really the hero? And are we going to step into that role, or are we going to let someone else do it for us because we just didn't quite step up to the plate? So there's just, those are just a few of the functions thrown out, but they're similar tropes that we've all heard of, that just organized in a system that really helps us look at all of the the very singular functions that get served in a story. And
yeah, that's beautiful.
Yeah. And I know I want to be showing up on the positive side of things.
Yeah, good. You end up with a better life that way, first of all.
Yeah. I'm not too interested in living a satire. I don't want to, certainly don't want to be an anti-hero. So
well, that's an interesting thing. I continue to be amazed at how much, when I look at popular entertainment, I'm amazed how much in the popular entertainment the heroes are anti-heroes or heroes that you really would not want to be like.
Yeah, it seems to be a trend lately, especially. And it's probably just reflecting the cynicism that's going on in our society. I think typically when you have an anti-hero, and they're unpleasant little stories, but they're fighting up, they still exist for a reason, and maybe even sort of a noble reason, because they're fighting up against a system that's more corrupt than they are.
Right.
And so it's the author or the screenwriter poking at us and saying, wake up, like this is going on in our world, and trying to slap us awake a little bit with an uncomfortable story. And so it's still not my favorite kind of story, but it helps to kind of know why some of those stories get written. And they're really kind of protests in a way to say, we're messed up. We should do something about this.
Yeah, well, I mean, probably the best advantage or takeaway that we get from any of these dysfunctional stories, for lack of a better term, is that they tell us what we don't want. We have to know what we don't want before we know what we want.
It's true. Yeah. I mean, that's why mistakes are so valuable for us, right? Because we learn the most is from the mistakes, and you've got to struggle up against those forces, and it kind of refines and defines who we are.
Yeah, refining, that's a good word.
Yeah.
Because that's literally what life is. I mean, all these life lessons that we learn and so forth, they're all forms of refinement.
Yep.
A little bit more, add a little bit more, piece it together a little bit more, form it into something a little bit more coherent than it was 10 minutes ago.
Yeah. Yeah. I was just talking to an adult child yesterday, and they were kind of bemoaning the fact that they had wasted like 7 years on a relationship and it wasn't good. And I'm just like, it's not wasted. The only way you can waste your life is by not showing up for it.
Mm-hmm.
Otherwise, you've got to embrace the love and the suffering. I think it's, the opposite sides of one coin. They come together, and you have to embrace it all. And that's the only way that, otherwise nothing's wasted. It just never is. It may not be fun. May not be pleasant.
It's a theme that has played out over and over here on this podcast. I've been doing this one since 2012, and hundreds of people interviewed over the years. And the theme that plays out over and over and over again is guests who come onto the show who went through some sort of trial and tribulation, some sort of crash and burn, came out the other side, learned a ton from it, and then declared, to the surprise of everybody, I am so glad I went through that. I never want to go through it again, but because I got so much out of that experience.
Yeah, I definitely have those moments too.
We all have, really, if we're honest with ourselves.
Well, it's probably even the purpose of life, right? I think we're here to grow and learn. And, I don't know, that's what feels like the core thing that drives me inside, is that as long as I don't even really care if everything's not working out perfectly, it's, am I growing? Am I becoming something?
Which goes right back to the origins of our conversation here, the learning the skill of storytelling.
Mm-hmm.
And I would say starting with learning to tell your own story.
Yes.
Not just to others, but to yourself.
Yeah. I mean, today I think I'd like to really talk about how we tell our stories, but then also how we have influence on others, like in our organizations, whether that's family or business or a classroom. Like creating this storytelling culture is really important. And I've met so many storytellers, and I know a lot of people tell stories professionally. And it's like a lot of them just grew up in this great storytelling culture. They had their papa that told them stories. And,
right.
And that wasn't me. Like, you don't have to be born and raised in that. Everybody tells stories. And I've had to work at it a little more. It doesn't come as naturally. Here I started off 20 years ago thinking, I'm going to tell stories and then this will be great. And I loved it. But the truth was, my husband, who had a father who told a lot of stories growing up, was a much more natural storyteller than I was. And I really had to work at it.
Mm-hmm.
but it's accessible to everybody. And it's an important part of our lives. It's really astounding, the research that's done behind the power of stories and storytelling and sharing stories, that I think it's, well, I've made it the focus of my life, but I think it's a worthwhile endeavor for anybody.
I think I would say for everybody. I would really go that far. And
Absolutely.
the reason I say that is because when we learn how to tell a different story, that's how we improve our lives.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely.
I mean, when we keep saying the same story over and over again and the lives don't change, then we wonder why. It's like, well, wait a minute. You haven't changed the story. You got to change the story.
Yeah. And it's really scary and hard for some people to actually look at the story. My sister, she always says, you have to figure out if the story that you've based your life on, whether it's true or not. And that can be a very difficult thing. Sure. But if it's not true, I mean, what are we doing? We are wasting a little bit of time, or we're just going to swim around in a story that's a little painful for a while until we can figure it out.
Well, isn't it also true, though, that, and there's that word true, isn't it also true that the more we tell a story, the more we make it true?
Well, that could be true as well.
Seriously, that's why you get, if you decide which kind of story you're going to tell and you change it to a positive story or a happier story from a negative, you're going to end up with a better life because you took responsibility for what the content of that story was going to be.
Yeah, and I would call that reframing. I think that's a really important skill to have, is to frame our stories. And I don't think, the whole idea of tragedies are interesting. I never used to like tragedies until I understood that tragedies can be very noble. And there's times in my life when I'm going to actually choose to be in a tragedy. I'm going to choose to lose the job or lose the friend or even the marriage. If
hard to believe, but true.
That's the more noble path. Forward. And so sometimes that little tragic hero is a noble character generally. And so it's how we reframe that tragedy. It's how we tend to tell it. And was it a disaster, or was it maybe one of our bravest moments of our lives?
Which is a wonderful way to approach the whole thing, because when you're learning how not only to retell the story, but to reframe how you think about the story.
Yeah.
That's when you're making the real change in your own self.
Yes, it's a hugely important part of the journey.
Absolutely. So let's get into some of the nuts and bolts of it, and let's start telling some stories here too. I mean, we're talking about stories. We haven't really, we kind of danced around a little bit, but
a little bit
storytelling.
Well, I was just thinking again of some of the things that storytelling can do in our lives, and the first thing I thought about was kind of along this idea of influence, and I just thought, we have people in our lives, whether it's a business team or whether it's our children, that we do want to pass down principles, values, all these things to them. We don't live our lives in principles. We live our lives in stories. So, so I just thought, think of a time in your life, instead of telling somebody about a principle that you want to teach somebody about or lead somebody in, think about the story about when you first learned that for yourself, or when you had a very important lesson. And the first thing that came to my mind was kind of a funny high school memory.
Okay.
But I was in charge of assemblies in my student council job as a senior in high school.
That's quite a job.
Yeah, and that, I guess I've been in theater all my life. Like, I can't get away from it. So I'm like, I'm still doing the same things in my life that I did when I was in high school.
Funny how that works.
Yeah, I know. And so the problem is that the year before, the longtime faculty advisor had just had enough and retired, and didn't really get replaced. So here I was trying to run rehearsals with masses of kids that were just happy to be out of class. And I had rather quiet voice, and it was difficult. I actually loved the job most of the time, but for some reason the Christmas assembly was not going well. And and I had people just not rehearsing, and I had no adult backup whatsoever. And so the Christmas assembly got canceled, and I felt really embarrassed about that.
Oh.
And there was one class that I was in where these kids just berated me over this. And, you're in high school, you're just tender, And I certainly wasn't super full of confidence. And they were just so mad at me. And I knew that it wasn't that they cared about the Christmas assembly. They just wanted to get out of class and go do whatever they were going to go do for that hour or so.
Right.
And I had this moment where I had lots of excuses. I even told you some of them. I didn't have help. I didn't. This happened. This happened. I could have launched into lots of reasons why that assembly got canceled. But I just had this thought: just take responsibility. I kind of felt like they weren't going to care anyway about any of my excuses, so I just took responsibility for it. And a really interesting thing happened. It was like, did it feel fair? No. But did it feel ennobling? It did. I was surprised. I was like, oh, I really felt like I had a shift in my life where nobody taught me that, but that just to stand up and take extreme ownership for something. It was my responsibility to produce this assembly for the school. And that was, it's just a silly story, but it really made a difference in my life and informed as I moved forward into adulthood. So that was the first thing that came to my mind. I wonder, Walt, if you can think of anything from your life where you I don't want to put you on the spot, and if you don't, that's fine, but just any sort of little thing where you kind of learned a lesson like that had an impact on you.
Yeah, actually, as you were telling your story, I thought of something from junior high school.
Oh, wonderful.
I participated in junior high school in intramural basketball. And as so often happens with intramural sports, there are varying degrees of skill level, there are varying degrees of sportsmanship, there are varying degrees of all kinds of stuff that goes on. Usually there are extensions of what goes on in the classroom. And in my own case, there was a group of about 3 or 4 boys who just loved to tease me continuously. Outside, not in intramural, I'm like all the time, every class that we're in, right?
Yeah.
I was always tall and slender, and so they equated me with a cartoon, actually animation character from that age called Gumby. So they called me Gumby, and they'd always ask me, "Where's Pokey?" And I
remember Gumby well. I love
Gumby. So anyway, during intramural basketball, because I was tall, obviously that's perfect for basketball, right? Because you get the rebounds and so forth. So I got picked by one of the guys who were more aggressive players. So he said, I'll be the playmaker, you get the rebound, and we'll win everything. Well, that was true, but in my mind, it was not complete because there were 3 other members of the team. And I thought, they really should be part of the whole thing. That's the whole point, right? You're doing basketball to participate. And they weren't particularly skilled. They were definitely not skilled players, but they were part of it. So first of all, we ended up in this one game where one of those 4 boys I was talking about, 4 or 5 boys, one of them was playing on the other team. And his own friends, those same ones who always were teasing me, were teasing him. They were making fun of his body. I won't go into what they were saying, but they were making fun of his body. I thought, that's grow up, guys. That was the thought that was going through my mind. So at some point in the middle of the game, now I'm on the other team, right? In the middle of the game, I start ragging on them for ragging on him. Saying, no, I'm not going to let you get away with that crap.
You'd had enough.
He kind of looked at me, and by the way, he was also the son of the superintendent of schools. So that also made an interesting little dynamic going on there. But he gave me this look like, you're defending me, but you're not even on my team. What's going on? So it was kind of an unusual situation. Another thing that happened is my friend who was the leader of our team, his name was Doug, obviously he thought of this as a 2-man team, so he was playing it that way. But I insisted if I saw one of our guys standing under the basket, I'd pass to him. I'd say, shoot. And he probably barely reached the rim with it, but he would try to do it, and I'd try to get the rebound, and I passed it off to Doug, and then Doug would shoot and score, and that kind of. Well, we finished the whole intramural season, and then they had an awards ceremony at the end, and we actually came in second place. And they weren't giving away second place trophies at that time, so we didn't get any trophies. So I was among a group of people who were wondering, why are we even here? What are we doing here? And the awards, they gave away awards for most valuable player, for highest scorer, and all this other kind of stuff, and the winning team. And they said, we have one more award to give. We have a sportsmanship award to give. Now, I didn't know what sportsmanship was. I'd never heard the term before.
Oh.
I was clueless about it. And then he announced I was the winner. And I thought, are they teasing me? Is this a setup? And I didn't even want to go up to get it. They had to talk me into going up to get the award. They gave it to me, and I said, what is this for? And they said, it's for your sportsmanship. What do you mean? And they started explaining to me what it was they had seen that they were giving me the award for. And I kind of took it and crouched and went off to the side like I didn't want anybody to know I'd won this thing.
That's funny.
But through that experience, I learned the concept of sportsmanship as an actual concept. Now, up until then, I just kind of did it because that's just the kind of person I was.
Makes
but
sense.
To know that there was a concept that went along with it, that was kind of eye-opening. So, yeah.
Yeah, that's wonderful. Labels can be powerful things.
Oh, they are.
Yeah, absolutely.
And I'd much rather be a sportsman than a Gumby, I can tell you that.
Well, stories they're just so memorable that they create what researchers call a brain hook. So it's something that makes it memorable. So if there's something we want to teach, if we want to teach our team at work, to take extreme ownership, maybe or have sportsmanship, whatever. Giving them a PowerPoint is just not going to be memorable. But the story, no, and
anybody who's ever listened to a PowerPoint knows exactly what you're talking about.
Exactly, yeah. Because a brain hook is like a stimulus that engages our attention, and it activates curiosity and also more powerfully an emotional response. So because we often have this little, like we're in that story with you and we feel those feelings because we've felt those in our own stories. And then it also activates our brain reward system, which means dopamine. And that's always something that makes us happy. So you're talking about having your daily happy stories. Right. One of the reasons why stories will make you happy. Yeah. And so it's just becomes a much more powerful tool, probably one of our most powerful tools of passing along information or knowledge. I wanted to share a funny little story from one of our tellers that we've had many times on the show, Donald Davis. I don't know if you ever heard of him, but he's probably America's storyteller. Like storytelling actually is like its own art form that a lot of people don't know about. So there's festivals everywhere, all over the United States. We have a very large one here where I live in Utah and in Jonesboro, Tennessee, which is why the neighboring university town started a storytelling degree so many years ago, was because of the National Storytelling Festival. It's huge. It's the oldest town in Tennessee, has huge festival tents. Like 30,000 people come from all over to sit in these tents and listen to stories. So Donald Davis grew up in North Carolina in the very up in the very rural backwoods in the hills. And his father happened to be an avid storyteller himself. Mm-hmm. And his father had used a lot of stories in the home. So Donald often wouldn't get punished. And he was a troublemaker, I'll tell you. There's a lot of stories about trouble, including this one I'm going to tell you about. So he was helping, his dad worked at a bank. He was helping his dad at the end of the day. And someone had left some cigarettes out on their desk, and Donald quietly pocketed them. And when he went home, he got his little brother, Joe, to come, and they're going to try to see if they can figure out how to smoke these cigarettes. And so they're looking for a good place, and they go up in the barn loft. And so they're just getting started when they hear their dad singing through the yard, because he always came and sang to the cows when he milked the cows, because he said the milk was sweeter. So
I love it.
Yeah. And so he's singing, and they're like, what do we do? What do we do? We're going to get caught. So they stamp out the cigarette butt and push it down between the cracks of the loft. And what they didn't realize was the crack goes all the way through. Like, it looks like it's solid because it's full of like little teeny bits of hay and things, but it went all the way down and literally almost landed right in front of their dad. Yeah. Came in the barn. But he didn't flinch. He didn't acknowledge in any way that he saw it. He just went on and continued milking the cows. And the boys were like, did you see it? Are we caught? And they just kept quiet until he left. Well, the whole rest of the day, they were a little bit on pins and needles, wondering if their dad knows what they were up to. Mm-hmm. And he never said anything. But right after dinner, he said, "Hey, boys, let's tell a story before bedtime." And so he says, "Did I ever tell you the time when Uncle Moody and another Uncle Henry, I think it was, burned down the neighbor's barn?" And the mom said, "Oh, I've never heard that story before," And they all sit down, and he tells almost the exact same story, that these boys, someone had left a cigarette at their house, and they snuck off but they didn't want to get caught at their house, so they went to the neighbor's barn, and the neighbor kids were always in and around, so it wasn't unusual for them to be in the barn or to be in the neighbor's property. And they were up in the loft, just starting to pass the cigarette back and forth, when they hear the neighbor coming to milk the cows. And they did the exact same thing. They put it out, they stuffed it in the cracks, and then after the guy was done milking the cows, they hightailed it back home. Well, somehow that cigarette butt was not all the way out, and in the middle of the night, a wind kind of picked up and it caught the barn on fire, and everyone was asleep. Luckily it was not winter, and there were no cows in the barn. Not being stored. They were out in the pasture, and because everyone was asleep, they didn't catch it until the flames were already shooting through the roof, and so the barn was a total loss. And so he's telling these boys this story, and the dad and the neighbor put two and two together and figured that the boys had done it, and the dad had to pay and help replace the barn. And then their dad said, "So, boys, what do you think about that story?" And his little brother Joe says, "I'm tired. Can I go to bed?" And Donald just said, he was giving us a chance. He was only going to give us one chance, but he was giving us a chance to just take the lesson and learn it. And that there was no punishment. There was no further talk about any of it. He never talked to his boys about smoking in the barn and how dangerous that would be or whatever. He just told the story, and that was it. And of course, the boys never, ever did that again. And that's how Donald largely grew up. And in fact, there's a lot of culture.
What a wonderful upbringing.
Yeah, isn't that amazing? And there's actually a lot of cultures where punishment of children is not part of the culture. A lot of the native cultures and tribes, if they did something mischievous or wrong, they'd get a story about a little wily chipmunk that was doing something awfully similar.
Yeah, absolutely. It's a great way to teach. It really is.
It really is. And so that was one of the first things I was going to bring up, is that, we want to have powerful influence on people. We really do. We all have things that we're passionate about and people that we're passionate about. And we want to share things that we believe are wisdom and storytelling has been a really powerful thing for that. And it can be, if we just create that culture of storytelling.
I don't know about you, but I would take the position that we are already powerful storytellers.
Yeah.
We just don't give ourselves credit for it. And we also don't realize the various ways we cause harm through our stories. Literally, we could change the way our storytelling is structured and produce different results, not only in our own lives, but in the lives of others as well.
I'm really glad you brought that up, because that is a devastating truth. It really is. We hurt ourselves and others through the stories that we tell as well. I had 3 of my 4 adult kids at the house this weekend, and I just asked them, I said, "Hey, I'm going on this podcast, and I'm like, do you guys remember a time when I told or someone else told you a story that really made a difference in your life?" And the one that one of my kids brought up was that they lost a junior high election for student council or something, and they were just crushed.
Sure.
And they came home, and this is the thing I just want to say about why we don't do it, is we often don't value our own stories. We don't think that they're important. We don't think they're brilliantly funny. They're not, they're not up on stage. But we're just here today. We're just talking about simple life stories. And I told my child about when I was their exact age, and I lost an election by 2 votes. I don't know who even told me that. I don't think that's probably appropriate for me to know, but I lost by 2 votes, and how crushed I was, but that I had gone on and done student council as a high schooler. I've already told you a story about that. I don't know why I'm telling student council stories today, but that's the story that they brought up, right? And the comment of my child was this: I looked at you and I could see that you weren't upset about losing that election. Here they are, you're probably 14 years old, and they're absolutely crushed, and that's all they can see. But they're looking at me and evaluating as I'm telling the story. That's like, oh, like she's over it. Maybe I'll get over it too.
Yeah.
And it was a powerful thing, a simple little story that ended up being really powerful and helpful for that child in that moment.
One of the other things that I've noticed from doing this podcast, and I'm curious to know if you have a similar experience from your podcasts, I kind of imagine that you do. So this is kind of like my way of, leading into it.
Okay.
One of the things that I've noticed from my podcast is how often we'll talk about something on the show where I can't imagine who would possibly benefit from it, or what they possibly would be looking for. Where is this actually going to play out in somebody's life, and they're going to say, wow, that really made a difference. And then later on I get an email telling me exactly that. Yeah. And you get that often enough, and it's not like there's tons of emails that come in, but you get that often enough, and you begin to realize everything that you talk about has an impact on someone, especially when you do it on a podcast.
Yeah.
In fact, I recall when I started, like I said, in 2012, I started mainly because I needed help. And so I figured I'd start a podcast from being experts on to help me. And it worked. It worked out right.
Wonderful.
But after a few years, we started getting listeners, which was like the last thing I expected with the podcast. And I remember the first time receiving an email. I've said this one before, but I remember the first time receiving an email from a listener, and the thought went to my head, oh my God, I have listeners. What have I been saying?
Oh no, now you have to pay attention.
Exactly.
Oh gosh.
Because I realized just how, even in ways that I might not even know about, anything that I'm talking about could have an impact on somebody.
Absolutely. Words have so much power, and stories even more so. Absolutely. Yeah. Well, the next thing I want to talk about, which is also super important and super powerful, is that our stories that we tell develop our identity. And so we've already kind of touched on this without even saying so, because the types of stories that we tell really inform who we think we are. And of course, we're very concerned about our children and our grandchildren, about that they're also being able to form their identity. And I've been reading some research lately that says that family stories are the number one way to form that identity. And also there's some older research that says that it's one of the top ways to build resilience in our kids. We want to have resilience, kind of like the little election story. It was like, even though my story ended in defeat as well, she saw that life went on. That you can survive that. So it doesn't have to be happy ending stories. In fact, I would really encourage everybody to share your difficult stories too. It's hard, but how much I grew up in a family. Okay, I love my mom. She's amazing, and she passed from ALS in 2017, I think, and I miss her. But she never would talk about anything that was remotely uncomfortable. She just wanted to, let's just make new family memories and whatever. And that gets in the way of relationships, I think. And our families need our stories, and they need our hard stories too. Wouldn't it be helpful if somebody knew that there's a family history of addiction? That's helpful information. I know for me, one of the things that I feel I've tried to talk to my daughters about is that we have been born and bred to be people pleasers, to be codependent, to be all these things. And I love telling stories about my grandma Park, who also passed down those same traits, I might add.
Sure. Yeah.
But also, she was also, as most people are, we're complex, right? And she also was a very strong woman. And so when she was a very young woman, probably 18, 19, maybe early 20s, she wanted to be a nurse. She just really badly wanted to be a nurse. And this is at a time where women weren't working, and It was very unusual, and they didn't have a lot of money. And so she really pleaded with her dad to help her get through nursing school. And he made her promise that if I do this, you have to take care of this family. And this also is a lesson. This is also a story about absolute, like keeping your promises and having honor, because she did that her whole life. I mean, she ended up delivering some of her own siblings at home in home births. Yeah, she was, and she just took, I mean, as a kid, oh my gosh, if you like, you wouldn't want to cough or anything around her, because she would take your temperature the old fashioned way. And she was always giving shots. I'm guessing they were penicillin. I don't remember. I mean, you didn't want grandma to know that you were sick.
Yeah, sure.
And I remember once I got a sunburn and she made me sit in a cool tub of water, and she kept changing the washcloths on my shoulders and rubbing vitamin E oil on me.
Okay.
She took her nursing for family members, and I'm sure professionally as well, but so serious. In fact, I would say she probably died because of her nursing, trying to nurse my grandfather who had a stroke, and it really was just too much for her. But she was going to show up till her last dying breath to fulfill that promise. And I want my kids to know about those powerful stories, because we do have some patterns in my family where women are more not acting in as powerful ways as we should be. Sure. And so this is so important to pass these stories down. There was a recent study that asked kids, you know, where you felt like you found your place in the world. And it wasn't stories of friends, and it wasn't even personal stories. It was the stories of families. And when we pass those on, it's like those triumphs become our triumphs. Their mistakes we get to learn from. And I've been really kind of surprised by the research coming out about this, about how absolutely powerful family stories are. So just
I'm glad you're doing that research, by the way.
Yeah. Super. Yeah, they're doing tons of story-based research, which is great. And it seems like a rich topic to study to me.
Oh yeah, you can do that one for an entire career.
Yes. So, Walt, tell me, is there a particular family story in your family that you've always kind of treasured, or that maybe informed something about who you are in your life?
There are quite a few, actually. A couple are coming to mind. One literally is a collection of stories that my father wrote about my grandfather.
I love that.
And the reason he wrote that is my grandfather died long before I was born. So there was absolutely no way I could know anything about him other than through the stories.
Yes.
And these are stories that I had heard from my dad periodically as I was growing up. But after my sister, my brother, after the three of us achieved adulthood, he decided to put them into an actual storybook for us. And he typed them all up. And it was the collection of stories about my grandfather.
I love that.
It was probably the best gift he ever gave me. I mean, because how do you top that one? I don't know any way to do that. That's like the best one.
Yeah, that's wonderful.
Because I knew my maternal grandfather. I knew him fairly well. And by the way, that's the other person that came to my mind. Because we were talking about things that get handed down. My maternal grandfather, despite everything that he tried to do, he went through a really rough life, trying to fend for his family and so forth. Went through the Depression. He was a Kansas farmer in the midst of the Depression. He was not even a very good farmer, which was even worse. And later on in life, he became a slumlord.
Oh, wow.
Now, he didn't intend to be a slumlord, but he became one. And he became one mainly because of the fear-based stuff that he learned during the Depression. So later on, when I was one of the first ones in my family line to want to become an entrepreneur, where were my influences? Well, it was my grandfather, who was a slumlord, and my uncle, who was basically a con artist, and this is my upline. This is where I was getting all my teaching from. And on the one hand, once I realized that was the case, I realized, okay, this is not going to be as easy as it would be for somebody who grew up in a family where they were all entrepreneurs. This is going to be a little bit harder for me, quite a bit harder, actually. But it also helped me to understand how you end up in situations like that in the first place. I understood how my uncle could become the con artist that he became. I could understand how it was that my grandfather could become a slumlord, even though he had no intention of being a slumlord.
Right.
There were a lot of lessons built into that.
I love that.
Yeah. But is it painful? Yeah, of course it's painful.
Yes, absolutely. Well, what you did was a beautiful thing right there. And that is giving some grace to the people that came before you, because we didn't live in those times, and we don't know their whole story. And we hope that when somebody looks on our lives someday, that we're given a little grace as well.
Mm-hmm.
Because our stories are complex. And I love that you went and dug around and tried to see the reasons why people made the choices that they made. And I think history is always so messy, and I love it, but I always try to enter carefully. And because they're people that I revere and love, even, I don't know, somehow kind of clean up the mess a little somehow, if I can, because these stories are multi-layered, and nothing is as simple or as easy as we think it's those. If you think a story is easy or clear, you don't know the whole story. Nobody knows the whole story.
There's also the fact that when we delve into these family stories that are of the negative variety, mm-hmm. and learn what really happened leading into them and coming out of them, it becomes so much easier to understand why we have patterns in our lives that we could never really explain.
Yeah.
And it actually gives us room to even forgive ourselves for them.
Yes. Yeah. And just as we would want to forgive, it seems like we're always the last one in line to forgive. But, the more we forgive others, then we get a little more practice to for ourselves. Yeah, that's so great. I love that story that you shared. I think we're almost out of time. Is it okay if I just run on to probably my last?
We got one more time. It's all right. Go ahead.
Yeah. And it was funny also because it's not only just our family stories. I mean, this research is showing that that's the most powerful, but it is books and it is films, and all these things shape us. And I just had to giggle that one of my kids brought up Ramona the Pest from Beverly Cleary, because it's a little girl that she shouts, she yells, she misbehaves. She's got the personality, 3 times bigger than her size. And she's a classic book character from a children's book. But she was somebody I glommed onto also as a child. So that's probably why I was reading the book to my own children, because I liked it so much when I was a kid. But I'm like, here's a delightful character that we love, and she's just naughty, a lot of the And as a loud, boisterous young girl myself, and this is what my daughter was telling me too when they were young, that meant a great deal to us, and it gave us the courage to be who we were. Mm-hmm. Even if there were some people in our lives that were telling us to shush and, to not be so big and so loud. I still feel like people are trying to squish me down in a box sometimes and telling me not to be, so big. And I like remembering and embracing Ramona the Pest. Mm-hmm. So you just know we all have those seminal characters that, we just cling to and that have meant so much to us. So good literature is great as well. And we are just so shaped by stories. But the last thing I was just going to mention is that we can use stories to problem solve. Again, they're such powerful vehicles. And so if we've got problems, I have a new podcast launching a week from today, actually. It's called Wink. Yeah, it's called Wink, Stories for Better Bedtimes. And it's all based around this idea of calming anxiety, busy bodies, busy minds, getting them ready and kind of teaching patterns of getting ready for bed and good sleep habits, mm-hmm. But really focusing on some mindfulness. So there's always an adventurous little story, but then there's some mindfulness that's tied into the story, that we just breathe and we do all these things to kind of get ready for bed. Well, the reason I'm telling you about it is because Stephanie Ruff, who's the storyteller that's the host of that show, she has flourished with really young children's stories. And some of the stories, one of the stories in the first season is called Mommy versus Monster. She actually wrote, you're thinking, you're trying to get these kids to sleep, why are you telling them monster stories? Yeah, right. but the kids have fears. Kids have, we have a story about separation anxiety, and so these are real things that kids want to think about and talk about, and that we give them little tools of ways to feel calmer about that. But she wrote this particular story, Mommy versus Monster, for her son, who had a period of time in his life that he was terrified of monsters, and it was very hard for him to go to sleep. So she just thought about it and created a story where the boy was swallowed by a monster. Oh. But right behind her came his mom. And the mom came down too. And together they fought the monster and succeeded. And it's a powerful little story that she just made up out of her own imagination. But her son stopped being afraid of monsters. He knew that he wasn't in it alone. And so this is such a simple little example. But there's so many ways. And I wanted to tell you one more story that my child brought up that they remembered from when they were from a child. And someone told them a story that helped. So we were at a family reunion at a family farm. Mm-hmm. And we had gone that morning to like a flea market or something. And somehow my child had convinced her dad to buy her a pocket knife. And told her to only go away. And she was doing that with her little cousin. And then she says, I wonder what happened if I would go towards her. She sliced a pretty good chunk down into her thumb.
Wow.
And the thing is her dad and I had just left recently to put some flowers on a family grave that was like 15, 20 minutes away.
Oh my goodness.
And so she was there with other cousins and stuff. And so they bound up her thumb. But here she was kind of left and abandoned at the farm without her parents. And she needed stitches. But she was cared for, but yet she was there waiting. She was in pain. She was sad. Mm-hmm. And some older relative, and I don't know who this is, but some older relative that she remembers as Clive came and sat down. Some old guy came down and sat next to her. And he started telling her stories about his scars. He's like, oh, that one kind of looks like this one over here on my finger. And he told her stories. And there's this other little thing I was going to share with you that I got from research. Is called brain coupling. I think we've all heard of mirror neurons, and it's sort of like that. But they've actually done fMRIs and even EEGs, and they've measured when a storyteller and a story listener and how much their brains get in sync. They just start getting in sync. So you've got this terrified child and you've got this older guy who's very calm, and he's not upset at all about the scars that he's telling her about. And her brain starts to calm down and to mirror where he's at. And so not only is the story just intellectually in her, frontal cortex is telling her, oh, it's probably going to be okay, but he's actually calming her down with that story as well. I love that research. I just think it's so beautiful. It's like this neural dance that we do with each other.
That's right.
And it's so beautiful. And so when we're coming from this great place, and I do love working with kids and just going in and, just seeing their faces light up, and there's just such power in sharing stories. So I just really encourage your listeners that your stories are very valuable, even the hard ones. And there's so much going on that you don't know that you're giving when you're sharing those stories. So anyway, I love it.
You actually remind me of one more thing I want to share before we start to wrap up. Jody Lynn is one of my other co-hosts. She does the Wednesday shows with me. And Jody Lynn was telling me recently about how she's just dealing with stuff in her own life. And I won't get into all those details because that's hers. We hadn't talked about it on the show, so that part out. But she's been dealing with stuff. And in the course of dealing with it, she found herself to be kind of on edge and trying to find some ways to calm herself down. Well, she lives on a farm and she has horses. One of the best things that she's found to do is just simply spend time with the horses. Because just being around the horse's energy is enough to just calm her down.
I believe it. Brain coupling isn't only just during storytelling. Like that can happen during music. It can happen during conversations. They just find that storytelling has a strong context for that happening. But yeah, I totally believe just being around animals, being out in nature, would probably start syncing up with nature somehow.
And where do the stories come from? They come from experiences like that.
Yeah, exactly.
It's a cycle, isn't it? There's life, and then there's story, and there's life, and there's story, and the's life and story, and it's just a continuous cycle.
It is. It's beautiful, and I just love the process of making art out of it. That we're teasing out the meaning out of it, and I just think it's wonderful. And I as we're leaving, I just want to invite anyone to come check out the Appleseed. It's really, we have world famous storytellers is an oxymoron, but we have world famous storytellers from all over the world that come in and record live concerts with us, and we package them into episodes. and that we now have lesson plans online that school teachers or even just parents or homeschoolers, anybody that want to come play with the stories that we've recorded. We've got a lot of really fun activities on there. So
tell people how to find it.
We're at byuradio.org/the Appleseed, or you can just Google, like you do everything else. The Appleseed is the main one that I work on, and then plus Wink, Stories for Better Bedtimes, is not out yet, but it'll be out a week from today. So. And
there's another podcast that you do. Tell what's the name?
Yeah, Kaboom. Those are like little mini movies for your ears. They're audio dramas with sound effects and actors, and they're high adventure. It's targeted for like maybe middle school audience. So
okay,
lots
very
of
good. I love it.
Yeah, living my best life.
Normally we have 3 things that we do at the end. One I can't do because it's the co-host who does that one. The second one is what you just did, which was sharing, how does somebody reach you? How do they find you? How do they find your stuff? Thank you for sharing that. And we'll also include some of that in the show notes to make it easy for people to find it as well. But one final thing that I want to do, and I especially want to do it with you, I noticed a while back that all of the people who come onto the show, they're all people who've gone through some sort of a crash and burn or whatever. They've come out the other side. They've learned stuff. They want to share it with the world. Maybe they've turned it into a business, or maybe they're just doing it because they love it. Whatever the reason is, they're sharing with this stuff, and they're putting out all this content about here's all this great stuff you need to know about. And they not only do it with our podcast, they do it with other podcasts. They do it on social media, and they write books, and they write articles, and they do
absolutely.
all this great stuff. And I realized we don't get credit for that. So Wendy, on behalf of those people you've never seen, never will see, who you've been helping in ways you didn't even know about, on their behalf, thank you for what you're doing with your storytelling, because you're making a difference in this world.
Well, thank you so much. That's very sweet of you.
I think it's so important to recognize it, because we don't recognize it as much as we should.
No, you just toil away and you don't even think anyone's paying attention, and that's okay because it makes you happy. But that's very nice. Thank you.
And it turns out they really are paying attention.
Yeah.
So thank you, and best of luck with what you're doing. I love that you've taken on the whole storytelling thing. Keep doing it.
Thank you. Thank you. Good luck with your continued success with your podcast.
Thank you so much. And to our podcast listeners everywhere, we value you as well. We'll see you all next time here on LOA Today. Goodbye, everybody.
Goodbye.